call the study session of the City Council to order. Call the roll, please, Val.
Bergen.
Here.
Drankow.
Here.
Hensy.
Here.
Rothy.
Here.
Scherer.
Here.
Wallstein.
Here.
Kanga says parent-teacher conferences this evening. He thinks he'll be here hopefully by 8 o'clock. Next item is approval of the agenda. Entertain a motion.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Motion carried 6-0. Next item is the presentation of a couple plaques of appreciation to some retired board and commission members. Richard Lindell from the Airport Commission and Reed Koenig from the Electric Utility Board of Trustees. Meet me up front. Either way. Reed, for your participation on the Electric Utility Board of Trustees, present you this plaque for your service and thank you for all the time you spent there, because I know it was a lot of years.
Thank you.
Mr. Lindell.
Easy on the mystery.
Airport Commission, how many years?
Just the 3 years.
Oh, just 3 years?
Yeah,
Okay.
4 years, I think.
Something like that. But no, we certainly appreciate the service that both of you have given to the community. And
Thank you.
down the road, if you feel so inclined, we'll welcome you back someplace.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you.
I don't know, this doesn't look very good. But Shorty in the middle here.
All right, thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Barb McWhorter, we're having tracking her down to accept hers. It's time for public comments on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that has anything they would like to speak about? And this is not on the agenda, so seeing none, we'll move on. Study session calendar. Municipal Housing Commission update to the council. Ms. Rebecca Lass from Waverly Homes, Waverly Housing, is here to give us her best news and update.
Give you a little bit of an update. I see some new faces on the council, and just to give you a little idea of who we are, what we are, we're over by North Cedar Elementary School, just behind Trinity Methodist. We have 100 apartments back there. We've been there for 48 years. Well, the six one-story buildings have been there for 48 years. The other three-story buildings been there for 38 years. Our main mission is to provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing for our residents, and we are governed by the federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. So we have to jump through the federal hoops, whether they fit us or not, but we do. And we have regular examinations, management and occupancy reviews that one was completed just last week. So they keep us on our toes to make sure we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. We house mainly people over the age of 62. We do take a few that are on Social Security disability if we don't have a senior citizen, 62, yeah, for that needs a place to live. We've had a couple of empties this winter because nobody wants to move in the winter. But we're slowly going through our waiting list and getting the apartments back up to speed. And so I think by the 1st of May, we should be pretty much full again. With 8 buildings and 100 apartments, there's always something for us to maintain or fix. Snow to move, grass to mow. We clean and paint everything once somebody moves out. Sometimes we replace the vinyl and carpet if it needs to be done. One of the big projects we have going right now is we're changing all the gas stoves that are in the Waverly homes, which is the 1-story buildings. We're wiring for electric. So many people come in now with oxygen tanks. It's not really a good idea to have a gas stove and gas stove and oxygen tanks. So that's one of our projects that we're working on right now. Of course, there's always other upgrades to do, and there's time and money. When and if the weather turns nice, we will hopefully complete the fence that we're building between the Waverly Manor, which is our 3-story building, and Crystal, just to give the residents a better view than the piles of stuff over at Crystal. We're hoping to build some retaining walls to try to help fix some of the drainage problems we have on property. You know, when the water gets high enough to start creeping in to some of the breezeways, we've got to figure out how to fix some of that. We were just last week talking about building new additional raised garden beds. That might have to wait a week or so, but we've got 12 of them now, and we've got people asking for more. So,
Good.
and many of them just grow what they need, and then they share the rest with everybody else. Our biggest project is we're working with AHTS Architects to help develop a building to be built on our 420 16th Street Northwest property. It's where the big white house sits right now. We're looking to put in a 2-story building, anywhere from 12 to 14 apartments. This will be for elderly. We'll basically run them through the same requirements that we do everybody else. They have to meet income requirements, they have to meet age requirements, and they have to pass background checks. But these people will be the ones that don't require a subsidy from HUD. HUD guarantees us so much rent for every apartment every month. And we have a few people that live with us that don't get subsidies, so they pay top rent, and technically they shouldn't be living on our property. So we're hoping to be able to move those individuals into our new building and free up other apartments for other individuals. So that's on the plans. We hope to start construction sometime this year. We obviously will contact the neighbors, and we have to come to planning and zoning because we have to be rezoned to R4. We're R3 right now, but we'll have to be rezoned to R4. Any questions?
Council have any questions for Rebecca? I know she runs an extremely good ship up there.
We try. I have good staff who worked really hard moving a lot of snow Saturday, constantly.
Rebecca, could you remind us what the income requirements are for residents who are in the homes?
I thought somebody might ask me that. I wrote it down. Right now, the federal government sets these income requirements, and they're based on the median income of Bramer County, which is quite high. A single person can live in our apartments if they make $44,100. Obviously, they wouldn't have enough medical expenses to get them down below top rent. So those are the individuals we're looking at housing in possibly our new project. A couple can make over $50,000 and still meet the income requirements.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you, Rebecca,
Thank you.
for the report, and it's always a good one. You're said, you run a good ship up there, and
We try.
I've been privileged over the years to work around there and meet a lot of the residents and things, so it's great. Next item on the agenda is review the District 1 sidewalk infill program. And I imagine that's Mike's department.
We're moving along very quickly tonight. It's only 10 after 7, so. Technically challenged tonight, so we'll see if Tab can get that one over there working. Okay, so you got a lot of information in your packet tonight, and the history of this is that back in 2010, 2011, the City Council at that time was reviewing what we want to do with sidewalk program, and we kind of discussed 3 different areas to focus in on. We had the inspection, repair, and maintenance of the existing sidewalk system. We had and the other category was gaps within the existing sidewalk system, where there was households where in the older parts of town that were established that maybe they had sidewalk along three sides of the block, but there was one side or one house that was missing sidewalk, so it created an incomplete pedestrian system. And the third category was entire neighborhoods that were approved and developed with no sidewalks at all. So we have completed 1 lap of the city, and we've done the inspection, repair, and maintenance of these 7 districts. And now we are starting over with District 1, and we're going to continue with the inspection and maintenance of the existing sidewalks, but now it's time to consider if we want to look at addressing gaps within the sidewalk system. So this is very similar to what we do with the newer subdivisions, where every 2 years we go evaluate all of the newer subdivisions and determine where there are vacant lots, and is it now time to require that landowner to complete the sidewalk so that we have a continuous integrated pedestrian system. So in District 1, we have gone through and identified the locations where we have missing sidewalks, and don't know if those at home can see this very well. What the numbers here represent are the surveyors or the platting. They identified the older part of town by blocks. So you'd have like block 1, block 2, 3, 4 of a certain subdivision. So these are referencing the block of the subdivision. And then we also have some sidewalk around the high school, and then down in Rolling Meadows to address as well. So then we go in, and block by block, we have then identified where the sidewalks are missing. So this gives you an aerial to reference, and these are color-coded. So this is the Veterans Tribute up on the corner of 4th Street and Bremer, and this is Dairy Queen. So we go around the block here. There is this one section of the block from the alley south that does not have sidewalk. I believe that this may actually be a city-owned lot now that was a FEMA buyout, and I see Bill nodding, so he remembers that. So if it is color-coded green, it's pretty easy and straightforward construction to install the sidewalk. Yellow means that there may be some design and construction challenges associated with it, and red means that it is extremely challenging and probably extremely costly in order to to go in and install the sidewalk. It may be that when you align the sidewalk where it's supposed to be, you've got 4 or 5 trees that are right in line with it. This one, I think with the garage and the driveway here, there may be some elevation challenges, and the driveway would end up having to be reconstructed as well in order to get sidewalk to fit in. In some locations too, there may even be steps associated with it. So you can flip through page by page of this document and see where there are gaps within the sidewalk system. Here's one that's green, so it should be pretty easy and straightforward to install. But the more challenging is for, looking at the whole program, do you identify some that we're going to install but not do others? What is the criteria that we're going to use to determine whether or not we're going to install a sidewalk? What's the cost share? Does the city pick up 100% or assess 100% or somewhere in between? Those are certainly the challenges that we have today. There are challenges that existed in 2010, 2011, and it was certainly a much, much easier decision to table these and concentrate on doing the inspection, repair, and maintenance of existing sidewalks. Does that inspire any questions?
I have a question. How have we handled any cost share in the past? Recognizing it's a different kind of neighborhood.
Sure. With the repair and maintenance of the existing sidewalk system, the city took care of all the ped ramps, and we took care of any sidewalk defects that were the result of trees in the boulevard. If the sidewalk was being heaved or there was a defect as a result of the tree on the property owner side of the sidewalk, that was their responsibility. But the program so far in the first 7 districts, the first lap around the community, we took care of 100% of the administrative cost. We also took care of any defects that were the result of trees on city property or issues that may have been the result of city infrastructure, such as water mains or sewers or water valves. Some locations we have water valves, city valves that are in the sidewalk themselves, or maybe a sanitary sewer manhole. So we would take care of those issues.
I've got a number of questions, and I'm not going to. First question is here, there's a lot of material here, and you have Rolling Meadows identified, but I went through all the material, and I could not find a picture that showed what infill there was in Rolling Meadows. Did I just miss that, or did that not get in the exhibit?
Okay, it's on the very last page.
Okay.
And along Sunny Slope Drive.
I don't believe we have that page.
That might be the problem. I'm on page, I'm not sure what page.
Yeah, our last
21.
page. Our last page includes block 77.
Right.
Okay. We'll get that to you.
Okay. The next question that I have, is this program going to include sections of town that currently do not have sidewalks at all, such as Bridle Spur, or I believe the Ridgewood addition has no sidewalks? Are we going to require those people to put in sidewalks?
The intent was that would be the third lap around the community, that we'd look at those subdivisions that were approved and developed with no sidewalk requirement.
Okay. Has there been a large public outcry that they want to have these sidewalks in these areas? I've not had anyone had a problem. I've heard people have talked to me before, when we were doing the sidewalk repair program, where there were areas of sidewalks that were not in very good repair, I have not heard too many people say, well, we need to have more sidewalks in these areas. Are the people in Bridle Spur wanting to have sidewalks up there? Are the people in Ridgeway wanting to have sidewalks there? Or is this something that we're deciding as a council that we're requiring those people to have sidewalks? It's probably an unfair question to you.
8 years ago, the intent was to address those questions 16 years
Later
then.
on, okay.
And so here again, I don't think the expectation is for the council to wrestle with that decision until we get to that point in time. Just like 8 years ago, they made the decision to only focus in on inspecting, maintaining, and repairing the existing sidewalk system, and then at this time in history, address the gaps within the existing sidewalk system, just like we're doing with the newer subdivisions where, you know, you have a subdivision gets 90% built out, but you have a vacant lot here and there, and there's no sidewalks. So do we require those gaps to be filled in? And now we are addressing the older parts of town that maybe were developed, you know, a century ago. Do we want to address filling in the gaps within the sidewalk system? And again, some areas are kind of easier to address than others. We have some areas where there's only sidewalk on one side of the street, and there's 2 homes without sidewalk. That is an easier decision to make than looking at neighborhoods that have sidewalk already on one side of the street, and the location that you're looking at addressing the gap may be color-coded red because you have a whole bunch of trees. So is there criteria that can be, I guess, you know, where you can be addressing it in a fair, reasonable, and consistent manner?
Yeah.
And you know, fair and reasonable is being able to say to one property owner, yes, we want sidewalk installed, but we're given 2 blocks over, we're giving them a pass on it, and this is why.
Yeah, yeah, and I understand the difficulty with this. I guess what I would want to look at is who are these sidewalks going to be benefiting? You know, and particularly if we're requiring the property owner to pay for the sidewalk when there's never been a sidewalk there before, and there was no understanding that they were going to be required to put in a sidewalk when they acquired the property. And now we're coming in and saying, well, we're going to require you to spend all this money and put in a sidewalk, particularly when it's in the older section of town, which tends to be younger families and older retired families that don't have a whole lot of money to spend on putting in sidewalks. These sidewalks are not going to be for the benefit of the property owner. They're going to be for the benefit of other people who are going to be walking through the neighborhood. It seems to me, just from a general standpoint, and I know that we'll get into discussion later on when we're actually talking about this project, but I want everybody to kind of know where I'm standing on this because I have some passion about this issue. It seems to me that if we're going to have this project, if we're going to require property owners to put in a sidewalk, the city should also be footing a fairly major part of the bill for putting in that sidewalk, since it's for the benefit of all of the taxpayers in the city. If we're not going to be requiring people, I would have no problem with having this as some kind of a voluntary program, maybe encouraging people to have a sidewalk with some kind of financial incentive for them to be able to put the sidewalk in, but not requiring them to have a sidewalk and paying 100% of the cost of putting in a sidewalk. I think that is not fair to the people who live in that in those neighborhoods, and also would be a totally undue financial burden for them. My piece.
Anyone else?
Are we going to go through, much like we did the first time around, and check for defects that have formed in the last 7 years to the sidewalks?
Yes.
Okay, and that would be charged or assessed or paid for by the same criteria we did the first time around.
That's correct.
And there's a certain amount that's been budgeted for this in the budget for the sidewalk program. Is the expectation that that dollar amount is sufficient to cover the heaving, or will it cover, is there leftover room in the budget to help cover perhaps part of these sidewalk charges? Like our reds and greens and so on?
At this point, in order to continue with the program, we're going to have to look at borrowing more funds to keep it going. As far as the inspection, repair, and maintenance of existing sidewalks, that's kind of never ending. That communities like Waverly are expected to have an inspection program so that we are maintaining a pedestrian-friendly and safe system for our citizens. So is this budgeted? At this point, not necessarily. Another criteria that can be used is to establish a budget, and when those dollars are exhausted, it's exhausted, and then we move on to the next district. So if you want to say we will budget $100,000 towards that, then that's one criteria that can be used. And, do you go after low-hanging fruit, or do you go after, the easiest, get the biggest bang for your buck, or do you go after trying to identify, well, which ones are the most important? It's not easy.
That's our call, I assume.
These are policy decisions, right? We can help with that, gather information, but in the end, you have to try to come up with a policy that we can then implement.
I mean, my preference would probably be the more bang for the buck, low-hanging fruit, get those kind of those green sidewalks taken care of first. Simply because, and sometimes the reds will always be there. They're not going away. They're not going to get any worse if we wait on them. But sometimes getting the greens in before someone comes along and says this would be a great place to plant a pine tree, it might make sense to get those sidewalks in first.
Well, sorry.
I was just going to ask whether you were going to come back with any recommendations.
I'm looking for, and James, jump in here. I think we're looking for general direction,
Okay.
and then from that we can start to refine the information down to, fit kind of the direction that the council is giving, and with the idea that there'd be some additional review done here. If this is something that we want to look at, getting some work accomplished this fall, we probably need to, let's see, this is end of March, probably by early May, have kind of a decision made. And what we would be looking at doing is, before any final decision is made, is sending notice out to those property owners that in effect we've identified as a higher priority sidewalk infill.
I think what I would want too out of this, Mike, when you're looking at priority sidewalks, I would take a look and try to identify high traffic areas. Areas where there is a lot of pedestrian traffic, and that if there is a sidewalk missing in that area, that would be targeted, as maybe a highest priority. And the other thing too is areas where there's no alternative other than walking in the street. So if you have, a block where there's no sidewalk on either side of the street, that might be something that we would want to identify as a higher priority area also. So using those areas the whole idea of the sidewalk program is to keep people off the street and make people safe. So if there are some areas out there, even if they might be a yellow or a red area that we've identified as being a high traffic area for pedestrians, that we might want to take that first.
So let me talk about two of those that I think kind of fit that criteria. The first one is down here in Rolling Meadows. And the apartments are being built up here, and you have a lot of housing up here on Letha Terrace. The neighborhood park is down here. There is no sidewalk on Sunny Slope Drive. Now, why is this designated red? They platted it with a narrow right-of-way. In order to be able to install the sidewalk, we need to lengthen the culverts underneath the roadway. The waterway goes around to the north and from the south of the apartments, and that goes through the culverts into the retention area here. So in order to be able to put the sidewalk in, we would need to be able to extend those culverts and do some grading work. That's why it's designated red. But we also look at it, the park is down here, and we have a lot of housing units that are going in up here. So this seems like it would make sense to at least have sidewalk down one side of the street, okay? The other one is up around the high school. So on, as 11th Street Southwest here, the sidewalk just dead ends into the school property. There is no sidewalk along the east side of 11th Street or on the south side of 4th Avenue in this stretch, and yet you've got parking facilities here, and all the children are expected to walk to the bus pickup and drop-off area in front of the high school here. So again, this is seen as a location where we probably ought to have a conversation with the school system about getting the sidewalk system finished here.
Again, that property is owned by the school. Would we be requiring the school to pay for putting those sidewalks in, or would we come in with some kind of a cost-sharing arrangement?
Well, this is where
It's either their taxes or our taxes.
Well, I
It's the same
understand that, but
taxes.
my point is it's maybe a clear example here with the school, but if that were a private residence and we were saying, well, we want a sidewalk in there,
Right.
we're telling them we want a sidewalk in there because we think it's necessary for safety. There hasn't been a sidewalk in there for 80 years. I think we have a responsibility to at least have cost share of part of that cost of putting in that sidewalk, if not a major chunk of that cost.
And a lot of this stuff has been done in the past, if I can step in for a second. I think the Vikings wearing off, so I'm feeling really good right now. The past reasoning we've done a lot of this has been that walkability. And we do get complaints off and on from people that have sidewalks stop, especially in the next month when the snow is gone, it gets very muddy, kids start to go out and play in the mud. We'll start getting the calls, how come this block hasn't had a sidewalk in? I had to put mine in, or mine's always been in. And there were quite a few of those lots that were taken out when the FEMA lots went out. And so there's a mixture of reasons and differences in each of these, and unfortunately, it makes it a very unique situation per block. And I believe it was a year ago, we went through this very exercise, and council did pick and choose which sidewalk they would enforce or not enforce, depending on the variables that we outlined. And so you'll have that opportunity to go case by case to see exactly why you would or would not do it. And some were, there was a transformer right in the middle of the block. Well, obviously, we're not going to make it go through that, or there was a 4-foot pine tree in the middle of the sidewalk. But that was kind of the logic behind it, was that walkability. So there is some thought process going into location, amount of traffic. We can have all that ranked out the best that we can see when this comes back. But a lot of this was just to let you see what we're getting into, the depth of it. This is our first round through the infill process. And to maybe go out and take a peek at what does that look like? What is the issue when it shows that it's red? What are you really seeing? Is it that bad? Is it not? So this is more of a precursor to what's coming versus a final, we'll get into this a lot further, we'll discuss it block by block. It's very exhilarating. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of that. But it's necessary to do that very thing, to make that policy, to put that in play. And eventually, yes, we'll look at neighborhoods that do not have any sidewalks. Is it worth it to do that? Because one of the other items we look at some of these areas is how wide is the street? Is it wide enough you can have kids safely in the street? Is it so narrow that you're going to be taking the sidewalks halfway into their yard because there's not enough length driveways?
Are these through streets or not?
Exactly. So this is really just kind of an introduction as to what we believe will be coming probably next month or so.
and we
To
want
kind of figure out what are you going to do as a council. And there are exceptions that were made last time as well. Some just made no sense. They just went to that block and stopped. there was nothing further to go into, whereas others now, as development continues to occur, there is a reason to link it up, where there wouldn't have been 7 years ago when we first looked at it. So it'll definitely be a moving target. You'll have that opportunity to discuss it at length, but this is just a nice view of this one. This is just 1 out of 7 districts, too, that we're going to start getting into to see what is missing, why, what does it look like, what should you do going forward, and that'll, again, come down to the preference of you as a council.
But again, this phase of it does not include those neighborhoods where there
ma'am.
are entire neighborhood, that's down the road a ways when,
Well,
well, I probably won't be on council anymore, I guess.
my concern about this, and I don't have a problem with looking at targeted areas, and, we'll look at this. My concern with this is I did not want this to be a blanket program
Yeah.
like the sidewalk program, the sidewalk repair program was, where we say every single property in the 3rd Ward has got to have sidewalks all around it, and the property owners are going to pay for all of it. That's not something that I really think is appropriate.
Is that what happened?
That's what I don't want to see happen.
Right.
With the sidewalk, the reconstruction program, well, yeah, basically. The sidewalks, the worst sidewalks were in the old part of town, without any question about it. And the property owners are required to pay for the repair of their sidewalks. So that was, in truth, when you look at it, as an additional tax on those people living in the 3rd Ward because they had bad sidewalks. So they had to fix their sidewalks, even though the sidewalks are being fixed because it was a city policy to fix the sidewalks. That's water under the bridge. I don't want to talk about that anymore. My concern was, and my initial concern was, and the reason I probably got a little bit ahead of myself, was that I do not want this proposal to be just simply a blanket proposal that every single sidewalk that's missing in the 3rd Ward or whatever the ward is next to mine, I think that's maybe 2nd Ward, down by the swimming pool, that every single house that doesn't have a sidewalk is going to be required to put in a sidewalk. If we're going to do that, then I think we have to be fair and have that same requirement in every single subdivision in the city of Waverly, which I don't think is really appropriate.
And I don't think that's how we approached the last phase of this, I guess, for what that's worth.
No, ma'am, it was not. We went case by case, and again, it is really to fill in those spots that are seen as necessary, because if there is a missing block, and it is the only one, say, on the entire city block that is missing, why would we not want to fill that in? And again, have that walkability in a community. There's federal grants out for some of this, if it's on a school route, but we've probably accomplished most of the school routes already. So we've done a lot of the things that we can do, and now it gets to the point of a decision made by you as a council. Do you want to go forward and produce this kind of a grid of walkable streets or not? And it'll be, like we said, case by case. You can certainly have that full discussion at the time and go that route. But that's why we're bringing it up, is to just continue to try and improve the walkable infrastructure in the city and district by district. So.
If I could just ask a real quick question. The color coding is certainly helpful, but on some of them, it appears that you've got blue rectangles, those type of things. What is that trying to tell us? If you look at your very first one, Block 12, District 1.
Yep, so that's giving you the parcel information. So here it's, let's see, let me back up a little bit here. So here it's showing the sidewalk, and then
Go to the second photo of that grouping.
down below, this is giving you the parcel information and the address.
Okay.
So that's this.
It's
So the yellow line that you have on the top one becomes the blue line at the bottom on the second one.
Well, this is showing, it's the same piece of ground, same parcel. This is showing, color coding the sidewalk and showing it. And then down below, we have the actual parcel, and it gives you a better view that there's no sidewalk there. It's a little bit redundant, but
The blue is the parcel, and the garage is actually with another property. It's a separate parcel, I think.
That makes sense now that I can
The little
see the
garage.
two of them that.
Yeah.
If you look at the one with the yellow line, it looks like a quarter of the block type parcel or smaller. Okay, makes sense. Then I guess just picking up on some of the other comments were made, I certainly agree with Rod. I don't think this can be a blanket, do everything type thing, and I hope we look to be creative if the street does allow to paint a walking section next to the curb, those type of things, to highlight a safe route where there isn't parking, those type of things. I certainly hope we'll look at those versus maybe those real tight lot lines where putting a sidewalk in ends up being at the back of the curb anyhow type thing. So.
Absolutely.
So currently on new subdivisions, they're required to put in sidewalks and fill in. I'm surprised that there wasn't a sidewalk already on Sunny Slope then as part of that development.
Well, there was, I want to say from somewhere around 1950, it maybe even started in the 40s until about 1980, where the city was approving subdivisions with no sidewalk. So to my knowledge, Bridle Spur may have been the last subdivision approved without sidewalk.
So Rolling Meadows, that's the one you were showing us, though, that is missing the sidewalk?
Rolling Meadow, yes, just along Sunny,
So they wouldn't have been required to put a sidewalk on that street?
I don't know why it was approved with,
Wasn't the apartment building built separately, and then they built the road?
Just to, if you put a park down at the end of the road, though, wouldn't you want people to be able to walk to the park?
the preliminary plats that were approved by P&Z and City Council, the preliminary plat requirement is to show all the infrastructure, including the sidewalk system that's proposed. And the entire subdivision showed sidewalk, I believe with the exception of Sunny Slope and 16th Street. The city ended up extending the culverts and adding the sidewalk on 16th Street as a later project. So that predates me, so that's getting out there a ways, 95.
I have, a similar, I think, approach to what Rod has described. At the same time, I want to say that I do appreciate sort of an overall, the pursuit of an overall plan for sidewalks for the city. I mean, I think that's just good planning, both for the encouragement, of walking over driving, and also just for safety. So I guess, and I do believe one can do both, take into consideration the special circumstances of individual property owners and have an overall plan.
And there must be, have there been situations where homeowners have not been required to put in sidewalks? I know up in the northeast section of town, there's a stretch that gets a lot of traffic from people coming in from Bremer Road that doesn't have sidewalks on several houses.
Yeah, that was one where I was making reference to on one side of the street, there's only on one side is there sidewalk, and yet there's two houses that don't have sidewalk. Why? I don't know.
And then there's the odd thing that if you put in a driveway in my neighborhood, for example, which is without sidewalks, you put in a driveway and there is a sidewalk. If you put in a new driveway, there must be some code that says they have to put in a sidewalk, because I've got a sidewalk on my driveway but nowhere else.
Exactly, and we are trying to, when it can be done within reason, because there are some places where the embankment is so steep coming down to the back of the curb, we're like, it's not, I guess, feasible or reasonable to expect that you do the sidewalk cut through the driveway. But when it is, we do want it installed with the idea that when we entertain this lap 3, that this is one less barrier to providing the pedestrian accommodations.
I have just a couple comments or questions. Some of the subdivisions, fairly recent ones for sidewalks were only required on one side. And I think Centennial Oaks is one of them.
Correct.
And others were not required at all. Is there any problem with city right-of-way and setback requirements? Suppose the residence got damaged to the point that it had to be replaced. With the new sidewalks in, obviously the setback requirements are my neighborhood is 25 feet from 1 foot inside the sidewalk. Now, where does that fall in some of the older neighborhoods?
Well, most of the old neighborhoods have sidewalks. You look at the area that we're concentrating on. That's a area that was developed in the early 1900s, and they had sidewalk systems.
But the end.
There may be a house here or there, or even on, if it's a corner lot, just on one side of the house that does not have sidewalks. So whether the older part of town has a 15-foot setback, 20 or 25, the sidewalk was always intended to be part of the subdivision.
Okay, right, very good. Any other?
So what's the best way to go about this, about prioritizing? Start driving around and,
That's what we hope you will do. Now's not a good time to do that.
right,
You may have to
Thinking.
wait a week or two, depending on how quickly the snow melts. But we've identified them. We'd like you to go out and kind of get a sense as far as how we have them color-coded, green, yellow, red. Start to see some of the design and constructability challenges. Give some thought as to whether there's sidewalk on one side or of the street or not at all. Those are considerations. Is it a collector street or a more quiet residential street? What's the proximity to the school system, to the playgrounds, those types of things all come into play. And then is there a certain amount that you think the city should put towards it? That can be stretched if the homeowners are also asked to participate. Those are the policy decisions that are going to have to be looked at here over the course of the next month and a half or so.
Maybe a little bit of an unfair question based on you haven't been out and done the inspection, but first round, the city put in a lot of ped ramps, a lot of tree, take care of those type of things. Is your sense that we're going to see a lot of places where the city needs to do that this time around, or is it going to be more the homeowners where they were borderline 7 years ago and now there's been deterioration?
What I suspect that we will see, as Roddy alluded to earlier, in some of the oldest parts of town, the property owners were hit with some large repair bills. I think what we will see is probably the same number of properties impacted, but it'll be a much, much smaller repair bill. Instead of being 40 feet of sidewalk that needs to be replaced, it might be 4 feet, or it might just require one joint to do some grinding to get rid of a trip hazard. But we still may be dealing with the same number of property owners, but the cost per property owner we think is going to come way, way down.
Trying to remember, it seems like the city's portion of each zone was 100 to 150,000 a year. If I'm understanding you, don't think the city's portion of round two will be anywhere close.
We have covered 100% of the administration costs. So some communities proportion that out across the work that needs to be done. The city has said that collectively we are going to finance the inspection administration costs of the program without imposing those costs onto the property owner. So the only cost that they have been assessed for is the actual contractor's bid price for removing and replacing a section of sidewalk. Does that help?
must not be answering or asking my question correctly.
So
The city's,
you're going to have some fixed costs regardless.
again, that was part of the last 7 years, but there was also a large amount of concrete that got poured for pedestrian ramps, those type of things, that was the city's responsibility. My question, or at least my assumption, is we should not have to do this 7 years later. So,
Yes, just like the homeowner's share of repair work is going to go down, the city's repair costs should come down as well, but the administration costs may end up being about the same. So if half of the city's total cost was admin, that's going to continue to remain the same to administer the program.
kind of a long, cumbersome way of saying we may have
As many to
money that we've
repair.
already kind of built into budgets to help offset cost share, those type of things.
And would you remind us, what's the average cost per square foot? I know it was in one of the,
I think it's about $5 to $6 a square foot.
I sense that the council wants to start this program rolling. We all have a job to do with trying to identify some sidewalks in this target area. But also, Mike, it might be helpful if you have an idea what the budget number is. Give us a rough idea of how many lineal feet that would cover, so that we know whether we're looking at 1,000 feet or 500 or something like that. Hopefully extends it a lot more, so.
it'll be helpful to get some input from neighborhoods,
Yeah.
too.
Yep.
We can all take a walk together around the neighborhood and look at the sidewalks, but
As long as we don't talk.
That's right.
as long as we don't talk about issues, then it's not a meeting. Be silent, yes.
Okay. I think we've covered that in great shape. The next item on the agenda is discussion of employee handbook. And James, is that your?
Sure. A couple weeks ago, we brought the handbook to council to look at, employee handbook, and they had us go ahead and forward it out to employees to get comments back. We did that. We assembled them and have provided them to council. And that's kind of, I guess, the state of where we are now. So I don't know if there's questions from council or discussion that they want to enter into regarding the comments that were received. But that was kind of the gist of what we were trying to get to, is to get some feedback on what was sent out, and then eventually get to the point where we'll have a new adopted handbook.
Discussion by the council? Anyone in the audience that would like to speak to this for a few minutes?
Good evening. Rich Kurtenbach. I'm the business representative for the public employees for the IBW Local 288. And tonight, I want to kind of convey, starting out with some of the concerns that the public unit has had here with the negotiations. Changes to Iowa's Chapter 20 of the legislation that governs Iowa's public sector bargaining took place in February last year. It was part of a partisan attack on public workers. You don't have to rely on comments for proof. You can Google the 2016 Iowa GOP platform, where it actually states, "We call for legislation that would eliminate all public sector unions." Unfortunately, due to the changes in Chapter 20, this is now affecting us here in Waverly. This evening, you're considering changes to the employment handbook. If it was not for the changes in Chapter 20, we don't believe this handbook would be much of a big issue. I have been told that even the city didn't even have a handbook until 2012. The city relied on the two collective bargaining agreements for setting the benefits for both the union and the non-union employees. So this change to the handbook is a huge change in employment standards for many of the bargaining unit employees. Let me reflect a moment on the comments made here on March 5th before this council. Mark Taylor told you what a punch in the gut it was to see the permissive items being ripped from the employees' collective bargaining agreement, a document that has set the employment standards here for the city for over 40 years. Yes, these employees knew what they were getting when they were hired, but now you are unilaterally taking concessions from them that have been bargained through negotiations for over 4 decades. Concessions that are not being asked for from us. They are being removed with no negotiating and just eliminating the grievance procedure in the employees' overtime provisions. And then Karen Norton asked you, and actually stated to you, we're not coming here wishing for more money. We're coming here to keep things the same. Our impasse is not over money. Your workers are coming and saying, please leave our contract intact. Please, she said, with the current situation in bargaining, you are creating a master-servant climate in which there is no voice and no respect for the voice of the workers. We have only had one negotiation session, and we were handed a take it and no further discussion proposal. When we attempted to ask questions, we were told to just trust us. Pretty hard to say you value the employees' concerns when you'll not even sit with them to hear what those concerns are. Please listen. At the March 5th council meeting, you wanted to hear the employees' comments on the proposed handbook, comments on the permissive items that have been proposed to be taken out of the contract. Well, there are many things that changed in Chapter 20 last year, but one that didn't. The obligation to bargain with the employees' bargaining committee on all mandatory and permissive items of bargaining. By circumventing that process, that is a prohibited or unfair labor practice. So the bargaining committee put together a concerted letter in response for you regarding the handbook, and it was delivered to Carla on Friday the 16th. I hope you've had the opportunity to read the employees' concerns in this letter. They are asking to meet at the bargaining table to give their feedback regarding the handbook. They're asking to talk about their options in keeping their contract intact, in whole or in part. I do believe you value the employees' concerns. You would not be asking them to give their response to the proposed handbook if you didn't. You would not be proposing an employee management committee and to have a more direct communications with the employees without the union if you didn't. Let me remind you, this is illegal. The circumventing the union relationship, the employee's voice at the bargaining table, not just at the expiration of a contract, but during the term of the agreement as well, is illegal. The IBW is known for being a union of hearts and minds. Our goal is to advance the welfare of all wage earners. Like most unions, we are based on the idea of justice, progress, and betterment for the self and for society. We encourage our members to become part of something bigger than themselves. And that's where you see a lot of our stewards becoming leaders and moving into supervisory positions. We bargain to reduce the fear and insecurity associated with at-will employment and bring meaningful democracy to the workplace. In just a little more than a week from today, on April 4th, we'll be memorializing the death of Martin Luther King, a man who died standing up for workers, just like our workers here, for better working conditions. A man killed while advocating for the very same working conditions the city of Waverly is looking at eliminating from the collective bargaining agreement here today. As much as things have improved over the past 50 years, unfortunately, the more they are returning to the yesterdays in history. Just to eliminate these employees' grievance procedure and overtime provisions is more than not right. We feel is wrong. On Friday, March 2nd, the city was emailed Union Proposal 3, which we have not received a response to. It has been sitting out there for 4 weeks without acknowledgement. We have been asking to meet again to see if there is any room for retaining any of the permissive items to stay intact in our contract, or keep any of the items that are being left out of both the contract and the handbook. This evening, when you go into your executive session, please remember, we are waiting for your response and return to the bargaining table in hopes to reach a mutually beneficial agreement.
Very good, thank you. Any comments, questions from the staff? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Ryan O'Leary. I'm with IBW Local Union 288. And all we are asking from City Council is that you direct your bargaining committee to come back to the table and meet with us. This is not an unreasonable request. We've only met one time for about a half of a day. With only one proposal from the city, the union has offered 3 proposals and still no response. So tonight, when council goes into closed-door session, and before any final decisions are made, the union respectfully requests that the city bargaining unit meets with us in good faith negotiations. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. We've heard from representatives of the union and their steward. You want to wait for discussion until?
I have no comments, sir. This is more of a closed session type of an item.
Right.
You know, the whole point of this handbook was not to become a union contract issue publicly as it has. It was to talk about the handbook.
Well, and in my mind anyway, we're a little premature with the handbook sections of it until we get the contract settled. It would be my thought on it, so.
I guess I bow to council to make that decision as to what they'd like to do then, because that's the point of why we sent it out in the first place under their direction, was to do this very thing.
No. Any thoughts from the council? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Just one quick, well, in terms of the feedback, you said you received feedback. Was that supposed to be information that we had received yet? So I see the kind of the revised handbook, but I don't see any additional comments from what we've seen before that were.
There was an email that was sent to all of us on March 20th, I think.
Okay.
It's
Some employee comments.
It was very,
Okay.
very few comments, but they were shared with us.
Okay.
Okay, I think we'll move on to item number 4. We'll take the discussion of the handbook up at a later time when we can lay some things out. Item number 4 is discussion of fireworks, and I'm not sure where that's headed. So,
We just wanted to provide this council a chance to discuss that openly. I know prior council had decided to go along with what the state law at the time allowed and not make any changes. And so with the season coming up in a matter of months, we wanted to provide that same information, this opportunity to the new council and mayor to determine, do they want to make any changes going forward? Do you want to continue to follow the Iowa law at the minimum, or do you want to do any kind of reduction? Really, it was just to start to gather your feedback for a future session to determine, is there any changes you do want to make towards the ordinance that Waverly has? We will have to do something at some point, since what we have on the books at this time is not really, was not eliminated or taken out for the new ordinance that was put in by the state law. But it was a matter of how far you wanted to go as far as restricting when they would be shut off, things of that nature. So we provided you a number of different policies from other organizations, some very restrictive, some not at all. And our goal was just to get started with that conversation as to what you'd like to see, so we can come back to draft something eventually and then work through this before we get to the, I think, early June buying season when it comes about. So that was the intent tonight.
It was always presented at the time that what we currently have on the books, so to speak, was a way to see what happened, and then for us to be able to come back and reevaluate it. And I think even shortly after the last 4th of July, or during that time period preceding the 4th of July and after, we had some, I think many of us got some feedback from citizens, and we did have some discussion surrounding this. And I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I will say that I felt then, and I still feel now, based on the feedback I was getting from Waverly citizens, that the time period was too long, during which fireworks could be used. I forget whether it was a matter of it being the curfew being too late for it, or whether we didn't perhaps enforce as strongly as we could have the time limit on weekend nights versus weekday nights and so on. So in general, I guess I'm just saying I would welcome some restriction.
I don't know, Chief, do you recall at the time, did we have more of an issue with the time of night or the days it shouldn't have been going on?
I've heard more about the length of time, because I think over July, that stretch is 38 days, July 1 to, or June 1st to, and I think we received, and I'm not saying this is all the complaints there is, but as a police department, when we went back and looked shortly after the 4th, I think we had 6 or 7, less than 10 for sure, of calls after the hours. A lot of calls of how much longer can they go? Those questions, but they weren't beyond the hours of the time.
Most of the comments that I heard, and I really didn't hear that many, dealt with fireworks, with the noise issue late at night. And I don't know, that's really very difficult to police, though, isn't it? I mean, other than driving around in your cruisers with the windows open, listening for fireworks going off?
We were able to locate a few. I mean, if the neighbors were watching, I mean, they were able to call in, my neighbor next door is doing it. But yeah, some of the bigger aerials, where the immediate neighbors didn't call in, but somebody else did, if they didn't shoot another one off, it was difficult to locate those sometimes.
And at the time, I guess I just want to remind everybody, I think, at least the three primary arguments I heard were from military or vets folks, from young families with small children, and from senior citizens. And in all three cases, I would say a common theme was, we know fireworks go off for this, if I were to summarize it, we know fireworks go off for this holiday, and that's okay. But if we can have a window where we know to expect it, both in terms of a limited number of days as well as the time of night, then it's not so bad for us. But when it goes on for, I don't know, however many days, and you don't know when they're going to be going off for that extended period, that's difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's, in my clinical practice, I'll put on my doctor hat for this, but that was the complaint I got from patients with PTSD, is that it goes on for so long, it's the random nature, they can't predict it and can't plan for it, and some of these people, it's distressing enough that they take cover pretty much. They go to the basement, they try to prepare as best they can, and that's hard to do for 38 days. I also heard from people with pets, dogs going berserk, and so I agree with Edie. I think it's too long of a time for both holidays.
Yeah, I heard those four things, and some people from whom I heard, simply said, "Why can't we just move the noise outside the city limits?" I don't know that that's possible, but that was their concern. The other thing would have been, if you're going to do it, keep it short and let us know when you're doing it so I can get out of town. I heard that from a few people. I'll take my pets with me. So, I mean, it's an issue. I really do sympathize with a veteran who's got issues with sudden loud noise.
Was there much talk about the December holiday time period?
No, on a positive note, we didn't have very many complaints over the winter. So
I don't know.
There was
that
a few
I
that
heard
went.
any,
There was a
so.
few that went off.
Yeah.
But yeah, we didn't receive any complaints.
The question that I heard was, what are we celebrating at the end of the year with fireworks? New Year's.
New Year's Eve, yes.
You have not been to Sydney, Australia at the Bowstring Bridge, New Year's Eve.
Or to a lot of European
In
cities.
Sydney, Australia, it is summer then.
Yes.
I just don't see a whole group of people going outside and standing outside watching fireworks for an hour in December.
Well, if it was on New Year's, if it was just on New Year's, I wouldn't have much of an issue.
I guess maybe a couple questions, just so I kind of understand the scope that we're talking here. Are we talking of restricting the sale to a shorter period of time, or just the shooting them off?
I don't believe that we have the authority to.
Yeah, legally, we can't restrict the sale. We can just restrict when they're set off, whether it be in the city limits, outside the city limits.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Yes, I wanted to make sure that statement was made, so that as we're talking to the public, those type of things, they understand that we can't shorten the availability of buying them, those type of things.
That's correct, just the time they're set off.
Yeah. Again, I had an opportunity to work the Heritage Day Oktoberfest tent, so I got the opportunity to see folks as they came in and bought them, those type of things. And I made a point of kind of keeping track of some folks that I was acquainted with and followed up with them afterwards. And I would say about half of the folks that I did follow up on, they said, you know, this is the first time, I just wanted to see what it was all about. Now I've done it once, I'm not sure I'm going to do it again type thing. So I think that was some of my hesitation after last go-around, was I didn't want to see us take any drastic action without really seeing what happened, those type of things. I do agree the time period that they're allowed to shoot them off is probably too long. I think we could narrow that down to 2-3 weeks at the most, and the week before, a week after, something along those lines. But I think it gets real hard to start asking police officers to go out and police when they're being shot off, those type of things. It puts them in a no-win situation, those type of things. So I would encourage us not to go too strongly in that direction, where we're looking at punitive repercussions for doing it, those type of things. But I would certainly support discussion around shortening up the time period that they can shoot them off, and maybe shortening the end of the day to 9 p.m. instead of 10 p.m., which I think it had been in the past, and those type of things.
Well, it's not dark.
Yeah, that's
You have to
one of
think
the
about when
issues
it's
with
gonna
that
be
time
dark.
frame is it's not dark yet. My concern with shortening it is, again, the actual enforcement of it. I just have a hard time, if we're going to restrict it, then we have to make sure we're following up and enforcing it. So it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to just have a time frame in name only. And I just don't know that that is something that I want our police officers having to chase down or try to track down all summer long or all June, basically. And as to kind of Dan's remarks, I kind of am on a let's take a wait and see approach on it again this summer. We saw last summer, we didn't have a huge number of complaints, at least called into the police department in terms of that. I'd be interested to see what happens this summer in terms of length of time, because we can't shorten the length when they're sold. They're sold at that same time, and so they could be sold on June 1st, and if we tell them you can't fire it till June 14th, are people really going to sit on them and hold them for 14 days and not shoot them? Well, I find that hard to think that they would. And then trying to chase them down and find out who did it, and that. I would be more interested in terms of a concern. One of the concerns that I remember hearing was the debris and some of the drift or whatever. And if something could be looked at within our codes in terms of having a responsibility for people that are shooting them to be responsible for debris that drifts into neighbors' yards or drifts into streets and whatnot, that they have to make sure that those are cleaned up. I don't know how to enforce that. I'm not sure how, practical that would be. But certainly having something in there that would allow neighbors to hold other neighbors accountable for, if they have a party and they throw beer cans in the neighbors' yards, there's going to be accountability for it. So why not the same thing for firework debris, et cetera?
I don't feel I need another period of this to figure out what it's like. I think, I already saw that. I'm glad Rich didn't get a lot of calls. I know I got calls and emails. I got quite a few during that period. And I think, if you want to implicitly sanction it, then we should allow it again. And create, habits that start to form, and then it will be even more difficult for us to change if we decide we want to change it later. I don't see what we gain at all by trying it longer. I think we had probably a pretty good taste of what it was like by trying it once.
I would agree with that. And I think that, no law is 100% enforceable. And so I don't think we should not do it because we're worried that it'll be difficult for the police to manage it. Just like speed limits and whatever else, it's
Crosswalks.
crosswalks, right? So I don't need any more evidence of it. I think we should restrict it. It's just a matter of how restrictive.
Well, I feel I would rather, if we're going to restrict it, to err on the side of leniency. So the idea of maybe a 3-week window, which may be long, but we can carve away at that over time if we need to. I don't want to do like, a 4-day window is the only time when we're going to allow for fireworks. I think that's a little extreme. But I think we can go, 3 weeks, see if that's long enough. If we still have too much problems, we can restrict it to a 2-week window or smaller.
I like Dan's idea of 1 week before and 1 week after. That's still a long time.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I would think we'd probably want to do like I would say 2 weeks. I mean, because 4th of July isn't always going to fall on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Right.
So I would say whatever week the 4th of July is that entire week plus the week before.
I think one of the sample ordinances had something like that, where it was the weekday of 4th of July was on the weekday, and then the weekends on either side, or something like that. I think you shoot off fireworks to celebrate July 4th, not the month of June, right? And with Christmas and New Year's, a distinct period of time around New Year's Eve, I think is fine, but, I don't see the need for a lengthy
I know
period.
just because our family's sometimes hard to get together, it tends to be the weekend before, weekend after that we actually celebrate the 4th. So I think including those 2 weekends is a good, and again, it certainly needs to be publicized, but again, I was surprised at how well folks knew what their hometown rules were when they were in Waverly shopping for fireworks. They knew when they could set them off, what the parameters were. So I think it's just a matter of educating folks in Waverly. They'll understand it. And
I agree with some of the concerns that Tim voiced about enforcement. That was one of the concerns why I was asking about the issues that we had. But in some ways, though, you're never going to have perfect enforcement on something like this. You're really depending on the cooperation of citizens, and you're only enforcing people that really get out of hand. And it gives the police a tool to be able to go out there and say, this is not acceptable. You're shooting these fireworks off at a time when it's not allowed. Personally, maybe it's because I'm kind of in a bad mood tonight anyway, but it seems to me that the reason that we're having these fireworks is to celebrate the 4th of July, and having them for 3 or 4 weeks does not make a whole lot of sense when we're celebrating the 4th of July. I could probably understand having a period that included the weekend before and the weekend after, even if the 4th of July was on a weekend, having the weekend before and the weekend after, but I think a 2-week period is certainly long enough to celebrate it, and I can't imagine any reason to go much longer than that. So I would be in favor of shortening up the period up a little bit. And I agree that the biggest thing is to make sure that people understand what the law is, because we're changing it here. We had one way one year, the next year we're changing it, and maybe the next year we change it again. People are going to get frustrated because every single town has a different rule. And that's can be a real problem. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that we do a really good job of publicizing what the rules are, so people don't inadvertently violate them.
I think
a problem that people have been given a privilege and they haven't, abused that privilege, and then we're going to take it away because we want to. It's
The privilege is to purchase them.
are the hours.
And to use them in the timeframe. And we could celebrate June 4th, which was Battle of Midway, but June 6th, which was D-Day. So there's plenty of dates that can come up with from a historian standpoint that I can.
I suppose my one position I will say is I don't want to be known as the community with the most permissive firework laws, because I don't want to be the pilgrimage for everyone who's in the mood to shoot off fireworks.
Could be an economic development tool
There we go.
for a certain segment of the population.
I'm not sure it will do our fire insurance policy rating any favors.
Are the hours conducive to, and frankly, I can't tell you what they are, but.
They were 10 during the week and 11 on the weekends, is that
11 on the
right?
weekends and on the 4th.
Or 11 on the weekends and the 4th,
Yeah,
okay.
otherwise it was 10.
I mean, I think Tim is absolutely right. 10 o'clock, if you were to close it at 9, it's not really dark yet at 9. So yeah, I go to bed at 9, but I can understand people who want to wait until it's dark for the
Only
setup
when
of
there aren't a lot
fireworks.
of fireworks going off.
You'd be up later.
I go to bed, I say I go to sleep.
Yeah, I think as long as it's predictable, right? So,
Right.
the people with PTSD, the people with dogs, know when to medicate their dogs, right? And the veterans know when to prepare. And so if they can anticipate it's going to be over, by a little after 11, then that will help them.
Well, part of it will rely on our news media
Yeah.
and social media to get
Spread the
the
word.
reminders out and things, but. I
And the
think
fireworks stands, people selling them,
Yeah.
right?
The direction I sense is that someone draw an ordinance or to restrict the hours and the number of days, or not necessarily restrict the hours, but the number of days, and making allowance for the Firemen's 4th of July, Heritage Days, Oktoberfest, whatever. I mean, convention, Firemen's Convention, I'm sure will have something, so.
I'm assuming that the week or 10 days, you're really kind of looking at however you configure that around July 4th.
Yeah.
And then maybe a couple days around the end of
around
the year.
into the new year.
Closer to New Year's, I'd say, than Christmas, if there's a way to do that.
I mean, you can actually do,
Well,
I've
that's
seen
right
one
now
that
they
does
go-
just
I
New
know, I
Year's
know.
Eve and
Yeah.
New Year's Day.
I'd be in favor of like a 3-day
And I don't
period
know
around New
why,
Year's Eve. But
why wouldn't you want to specify hours? I think that would make sense. I mean, you can decide it more or less, but otherwise, we don't want them going off at breakfast time. I don't.
Well, obviously, it will come back to this council for action, so we can,
I did want to point out something, though. You talk about enforcement, and you talk about who's going to be making complaints. I think this year what we saw was everybody kind of knew who was the person doing it because they were probably their next-door neighbors, and they were giving them the benefit of the
Yeah.
doubt this year. And so you really didn't get as many complaints. If you do it year after year and a long period of time, and it's always random and that kind of thing, you're going to get a lot more complaints, and you'll develop a lot more over time. People just get tired of it. So I think the limitation is easier to write for now and see what we do after the limitation.
I think people knew the council was sort of in a wait-and-see mode, and it was a new law, and you'll give people the benefit of the doubt and see how people behave.
very good.
I would
This
assume that
last
the
year.
hours at New Year's, that those are different because most people would be firing the fireworks off at
6
midnight.
p.m.
So I would assume the hours are not cut off at 11 o'clock on that holiday. I don't know what they
New
are.
Year's Eve is 12:30.
12:30?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds reasonable to me.
And Mike, the start time by code is 9 a.m. is when the state of Iowa code starts at 9.
9 a.m.?
That's when,
Yeah, all
That's what
day
the-
long, yeah.
Have an early breakfast.
Talk about it. Talk about
The
it.
other, the other element of this that I've heard other people talk about, and we haven't really mentioned tonight, we've talked about time periods here, the location. I don't know, city code as far as city parks and city property, we don't have anything on restrictions right now, do we?
no, you
State
cannot
law.
on
They're not
public.
permitted in the city.
Not permitted on public.
They're not permitted
Only private.
under current code.
I think the state law said you could set them off on your own property unless you had authority from your neighbor, some other property, which again, any city property, you would not have authority to do that unless you went through the permit process. So
that's something
in
that needs
effect,
to be-
that eliminated all public property from being used.
Because I thought that's what's, like Cedar Falls was passing ordinance about their city property, so they didn't really need to pass that ordinance.
Not necessarily. I think they did it to be very clear what that meant, so there wasn't
Well,
any.
That's why I brought it up, is because that kind of, you hear that, and, and I'm okay with restricting it on those areas. That to me is.
I mean, we may want to repeat, some of the things that are Iowa code, just to make sure we have a comprehensive policy. If somebody goes to it, then they see everything.
And I'd ask one more thing. I think nobody's had any concerns about where they're being sold. I know some cities have used different zoning ideas to restrict where they're being sold, but I haven't seen any issues with people thinking that it's not okay to put up a tent at Walmart parking lot or the Ivy parking lot, that kind of thing.
As long as it's commercial property, I don't have a problem.
Some of them limit them to industrial or, and so they've kept them away from.
Is that for a
commercial.
safety issue?
Safety
Seriously,
issues.
yeah, in case they go up and.
Yeah, if the parking lot, if you have a tent in the Ivy parking lot
Yeah.
and it would go up, it'd be
I
quite
would
a
hope if
show.
it's not already restricted, you can't open up your garage and set up a
Right.
lemonade stand. It needs to be in a commercially.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't really want them selling fireworks out of the back of their truck the way they sell sweet corn.
Well, we certainly
There is a
let them in the
license.
right of way.
No, you have to have a license through the state of Iowa to sell, and then that would be a part of the permitting process of the state.
And then to the mayor's comments, large special events have a whole different permitting process, so.
We'll keep that process largely in place because that's just an idea of where they're going to set up, how they're, yeah, we'll do that same thing.
And do we have to think about what actually they can shoot off, or does the state law cover
No.
that?
It defines it.
Okay, Val has good notes. We'll see a draft of an ordinance in the next few weeks.
Yes, sir.
Moving on, reports from boards and commissions. Planning and Zoning Commission minutes from February 1st, 2018. Anything other than what was in your packet? Taken into record. Library Board of Trustee minutes, February 13th, 2018. Everything's good, Mike?
It's just wonderful.
Great. Received into record Economic Development Commission minutes, February 13th, 2018.
I guess the only comment is the group continues to discuss, I think it was brought to us, do we do some type of promotional campaign? And I think there's good discussion amongst that group that there's probably value in it, but we need to understand, is there financial commitment as well as resources to make it a long-term proposition versus a one-shot over-the-bow type thing.
It's on for the second.
So I think we're making good progress, good conversation, and the group should have something for us shortly.
Waverly Chamber of Commerce minutes. Without taking Eric's thunder away, the chamber held their annual awards banquet last Friday night at Prairie Links Clubhouse or Event Center. Well attended. Excel Group received the Large Business Award. Classic Cleaners, the small business. And Emily Neindorf, and I can't, and Paula Stevenson each received awards, so.
And Kathy Olson.
And Kathy Olson, right, forgot about that one.
Paula was a presenter, I think, wasn't she?
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
yep, I stand corrected.
Kathy.
Trying to recall most of these off the top of my head, so.
Friends of the Family, right, was also an organization.
Friends of the Family.
It's a nonprofit.
Eric will have it all in the paper tomorrow.
Sorry, we didn't attend for, we just couldn't find anybody to cover it.
Okay, very good. Somewhere we'll get all the information out. Minutes received into record. Bremer Waverly Law Board minutes, March 12th, 2018. Received into record. Staff comments.
we have a few, sir.
Yard waste site was supposed to open today, but due to extreme weather conditions, we have postponed that until next Monday. Hopefully, weather conditions will be suitable. They might be cool, but as next week are forecast to only be in the mid-30s. So still playing that one by ear a little bit, but as of right now, we're going to open next Monday, the yard waste site. Bremer Avenue, we're somewhat uncertain as to exactly when that may occur. There's been some discussion it might be Thursday, but we have not received any definitive word, or I have not. Bill is shaking his head, he has not either. So I think that they are trying to come up with a game plan, but they are also looking at the forecast and trying to determine when weather conditions will be suitable for them to set up the traffic control.
Okay. Any other staff comments?
No, sir, I don't believe so.
Excuse me,
I stand corrected again.
just reminder everybody with the snowstorm, we need to get sidewalks done, and we're making the statement, make a reasonable effort with because I had to shovel mine, and the snow's heavy and there's slush underneath and all that sort of thing, so make a reasonable effort. Secondly, we were going to open the golf course, we decided not to. Yeah, it's a run on snowshoeing and cross-country skiing again. And lastly, if you didn't know it, City Hall won the food fight at 1,111 pounds against the library at 583 pounds.
What was the last night?
And we're closed on Friday.
Oh, that's right. Good Friday, city offices are closed. Okay, city council comments. Brian? No. Rod?
None for me.
Edie?
I just have a question of staff, I guess. The email that we were sent kind of late in the day today about a communication that was going to go out to the neighbors out where the tree clearance is occurring. Is that are you looking for a feedback on that, or is that a note that's already gone out, or?
It already went out.
Okay. Okay. And I guess just to follow up, you feel that that order of people to contact is right, that the first order is not a city staff person?
And I think that's right, because on Bremer Avenue, most of the property owners along there learned that Mark Etheridge from WHKS was the on-site engineer. He was the most important person to get to know and contact. We think the same thing will be true on the Parkway.
Okay.
That engineer on site will be the person that probably fields most of the issues and questions. And if they can't get a hold of him, then they can get a hold of us.
Okay.
And they always knew that they had Mike and I, and I think we've had lots of conversations with all of the property owners out there, and have tried to address a lot of things, been out there a lot. And I think Boyce is the addition that they don't know, and so getting his name on that, I think, is a real important thing for them to know who's going to be on site. He's got a cell phone there, which means he can answer it. I think that'll work out just the best, and then he can get a hold of us if he needs us.
And when will he start being on site?
He has already
He's
been
there
on
already?
site. Yep. They've been mostly on the other side of the river from the property owners with the work that's being done over on the driving stilt, or the things on the ground. A lot of noise.
I think that's a good option to go with. I think city staff will certainly keep tabs on it, but he's going to know day to day what's happening, as well as what the immediate schedule is for the next couple of days.
That's right, and if something comes up on the weekend, we want them to first attempt to contact me. Bill is the backup and stuff. So if there is any situations that come up, we want to make sure that they understand that there is a line of communication, whether it's something project related or something that's a little bit more urgent that needs to be addressed.
Ann?
Nothing for me, thanks.
Dan? Mike? Very good. I just have a couple comments. First of all, a huge thank you and vote of appreciation to leisure services personnel and street departments for the snow removal. I heard Brian telling someone this morning about the hours that they put in, and I venture to say if we would drive to Cedar Falls and Waterloo, that it would not be the same.
They only got half the snow.
Well, but it'd take them twice as long. So, but no, thank you, and I hope all the citizens of Waverly extend that same appreciation to the workers. Thank you, Katie Drager, for being a guest council person this month. Do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to impart to us?
No.
Good luck.
Well,
I asked Katie if it was difficult to endure, and she didn't give me a very straight answer on that.
well, if her employment keeps her in the area, maybe we'll see her name on the ballot someday. And
We'll see.
we'll see. So. Okay, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session.
I'll move to go into executive session to discuss collective bargaining strategy for the upcoming city unit negotiations as provided by Section 20.17(3) of the Code of Iowa.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Roll call vote.
Bergen,
Yes.
Drinkow,
Yes.
Kangas,
Yes.
Goldstein,
Yes.
Rothy,
Yes.
Kenzie,
Yes.
Sher.
Yes.
Motion to enter into executive is hereby approved, 7-0.